All right, all right. We are kicking off here with our first panel. I'm Chuck Doerr, OpenFin's president and CIO, one of our co-founders. With me today, I've got Michael Banham, Mariya Brown, and Colin Eberhardt. We're going to start off with them just going down the line, giving a quick intro, and maybe throw in a little something about relevant to evaluating workflow technology. That's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to try and keep it to about 20 minutes, so it's going to be a battle of voices here.
So I'm Michael Banham, a voice technical lead at agency trading at UBS. I think for me, workflow technology is really where the industry's heading in terms of integrating applications on the desktop. I think it's something that is definitely evolving right now. I think there's a long way to go on that. I think we not only need to connect the apps, but we need to evolve the workflow that sits on top of that as well. So that's really exciting for me.
Awesome. Mariya.
Hi, everyone. Mariya Brown. I head UK EU innovation for Bank of New York Mellon. I recently joined the firm. And I guess my angle is I should mention that I started my journey as a front-end developer back in the early days of internet, and then moved into CX, UX, and then became a product manager. And now it's for the first time that I have the word innovation in my title, so it's very exciting. But to me, I think every workflow begins with the user in mind. I think it's very important to understand what it is you're trying to design for, develop for, achieve in the end.
Great.
Cool. So I'm Colin Eberhardt. I'm the CTO of Scott Logic, which is a UK-based software consultancy working predominantly within the financial services sector. We work with a number of OpenFin clients, building a lot of stuff with web technologies, and that's very much my background. In terms of a teaser of what I'd like to talk about, I think some of the demos we've already seen are really cool. They've allowed us to do some of the things that we currently do, but do them faster, which is good. I think the real opportunity here is to actually do things in a different way so we don't have to do them faster. I think we can do things in a smarter way, which is what I'd like to talk about.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for joining us today. We're going to kick off with maybe a question to Michael, and we're going to try and keep it conversational. So, I mean, you've got some recent experience integrating sort of new technology into a workspace. Maybe talk a little bit about what that modern workspace is like.
Sure. I think if we think about a modern workspace, you wouldn't be looking at a trader's desktop, really. It's far from being modern. There's 8 screens with 8 big, large ticking grids of data. You've got pop-ups coming up all over the place. They're having to move focus continuously, when they're trying to service clients. So I think we're a long way away from a modern workspace. I think the challenge is how do we get there? And how do you take those 8 big, large ticking grids that you've got on your desktop and then move them into that modern workspace? Now, the big challenge is behind all of those large ticking grids, there's a whole stack. There's middle tiers, OMSs, messaging layers, all sorts of gateways and everything else that sits behind those. So I think the real challenge is how do you move that? And the way in which you can do it is rather than sort of go away, secure, some funding and come back in 10 years' time with a brand new modern workspace. You need to actually think about how do I evolve that? How do I evolve it from what I have now, which is this large ticking grid written in C# WinForms? How do I take that and then put it into web technology? So I think there is various ways you can do that, and the way I would probably say is you would start to build out your HTML, your web content and things like that, and actually integrate that into that workspace, but then also reconnect it back to your legacy application as well. So you actually start to evolve the app over time, and then you also start to replace some of the middle tier and back ends that actually exist behind that too. So yeah, I think that's the way I would probably approach it. Yeah.
Speaking of legacy applications, in my past experience, we partnered with OpenFin, but the journey was not what we expected in the beginning. So 3 or 4 years ago, the thinking was it's the interoperability is what we were really after. But then as we were looking at our massively old and complex legacy application where logic was interwoven into the design, into the UI backend, it was a complete spaghetti mess. we started breaking that apart and almost developing, sort of using the APIs to connect to the backend and rebuilding the front-end bits. But then we used OpenFin to glue it all together into the actual workflow to come up with an app, essentially, but a configurable app. So as a software company, the benefit was really that we could configure it for each client slightly differently. And that's sort of in an unexpected way. And of course, as the sort of development progressed, I mean, this is 3 years ago, then we got all these freebies from OpenFin. It was very exciting to get notifications for nothing. And then they had the App Store.
I meant swag.
That too.
The softest T-shirts in the game. Softest T-shirts in the game. Yeah.
Cool. I guess I'm probably going to say something quite surprising for a CTO. I don't think this is a technology problem anymore. We've got pretty much all the technology we need at our disposal to connect application A, B, C, and D together. I think it's a problem of imagination more than anything else. There was an interesting thing in the slide at the beginning about users today using around about 36 different applications. And at the moment, the tools like OpenFin can allow you to navigate from application to application far quicker than you could previously, which is good, but I don't think that should be our end goal. And I was kind of thinking, 5 years ago, if I wanted to know what time does Fin.js start, I'd type that into Google, and it would go, oh, okay, the Fin.js website will give me that answer. I'd navigate to the website, I'd probably scroll around, and oh, okay, it starts at 5 o'clock, because Mitra cracks the whip and makes sure that it starts at 5 o'clock. Nowadays, if I type, what time does Fin.js start, I don't need to go to the website anymore, because it surfaces that information immediately, and I close down Google, and that's it. Whilst I'm talking about hopping to another website, we should be doing this on the desktop. We shouldn't be having people visiting 36 different applications. We should use the connectivity we're building to surface the content they need to prevent the need to hop rapidly from one application to another.
I 100% agree with you. I mean, it's not just about taking apps and sticking them together, really. I mean, then you've just got apps that are stuck together. It's about, I think, changing the way you interact with that workflow as well, and being fed information that you need to know at the same time. So if you're a sales trader being fed, you need to focus on this, or there's some potential liquidity here, or this client you need to call because of this. So rather than having to go and search for that information, you essentially should just be fed it. And being able to action that information fairly quickly. So I think,
yes, surfacing relevant information sort of at the right points based on the context of the overall desktop is something that we're really seeing people do quite a bit. Leveraging the common UI components to bring user journeys together. Mariya, I mean, you were talking about this sort of user-centric view of the world. How are you seeing that play out in your world?
I think you guys stole the show already. I think everybody's heading in the same direction. I think to me it's asking the questions. You mentioned the trader desktop. Yes, they have 8 screens. 4 of them are just monitoring the market. So the question you would ask as a designer coming in, what are you monitoring? What do you want an alert on? Do you need to see all this? What is the important bit? And based on that, you can, if the question is what time does the conference start, you should just get the answer. You don't need to look at and waste X amount of electricity on this.
Right.
The problem I see though is quite often we're offloading the design responsibility to the user. If you give them a highly configurable workspace where everything connects together and go, here you go, they'll go away and connect it together, but they'll connect it up using the same workflow that they've been using for the past 5 or 10 years. I think it's a problem of imagination. We need to use these technologies to then open the door for the designers who actually have the opportunity to think differently, to yield a much better result than the user could create themselves.
I think a good test is always, I've designed a few things for mobile, and I think that's the ultimate usability test, because your actions and connections are very limited and you have a tiny space. And if you can fit it into there and get the workflow to sort of make sense for the end user, then you can be very confidently sort of enlarging and expanding that on a desktop.
Yeah. What you need to do is find a trader who's willing to go with an experiment. I honestly believe you could create a workspace that sits on one screen and does exactly what they need, rather than the 8 screens. I went to one that had 12 screens, and it was ridiculous. I mean, they're moving their heads like this. And I was thinking, you're looking over here. Why don't we take all that stuff and put it all onto one screen? They're like, no, we can't do that.
Yeah, the trader has been the integration layer historically, right?
But that's the challenge, I think, as well, is around changing the way that they, looking at their workflows and looking at what they actually have to do to service their clients, and thinking about, do I need to click 100 buttons to take a trade in? But right now, you probably do, because you've got to do all these certain things. So, but if we can automate a lot of that as well, and that really comes down to the automation. There's a lot of decisions can be made for you based on particulars of the trade as well. So I think it's about automating a lot of also what we do right now is really important. So.
Yeah. Now, I mean, we've talked about, maybe grabbing a sort of forward-thinking trader and taking them on a journey, trying to get stuff out of them. Where do we see sort of the power users sitting here, right? Like we see a lot of our customers talking about, hey, what I want to be able to do is I want to be able to empower my users to, create a rich workspace using, a highly configurable sort of end user, and then share that out, like do sort of best practices. Now, will we just get a faster horse, or do we think we can tie in and get some cars out of the game?
Yeah, I've still got a bit of a dim view of the power user concept. I think some of them genuinely do exist, but I've been through so many projects where we've built trading platforms, and they want the latest and greatest, configurable workspace. And I'm not talking about a sort of OpenFin workspace. It's more within the context of a single application. We want to be able to have our tiles over here. We want to have a chart over here, move it around, save it, load it. And most end users spend very little time moving things around. More often than not, it would be someone from the sales team would go along and they'd say, oh, this is how you configure it all. And they go, oh, okay, thank you. And they'd keep the workspace configuration that they were originally given. But for the past 5-10 years, I've been fighting to take away as much configuration as possible and come up with something a bit more opinionated based on the sort of knowledge of my clients who are designers.
Yeah, we've spent years kind of implementing this concept of configurable panels and workspaces. You can link this and do that. But you're absolutely right. People don't really change it too much, unless to revert back to what it was because they've messed it up. So it's just something that people don't do.
I remember working for ages on one which had a nice sort of grid snapping system. Because things got a bit messy, they said, okay, we'll make everything snap to a grid of sort of 10 by 10 pixels. That works, but then what happens when their browser window's wider? There's this great big space over here. It's like, however smart you think your workspace concept is, it almost always falls apart at the seams somewhere.
This reminds me of something Churchill said, sorry, I prepared a long speech because I didn't have the time for the short one. I think it's always more difficult or challenging to come up with a short workflow. And there's a bit of a sort of a debate, I suppose, between the system engineers and the designers, where the designers always push for the short version, which actually takes much longer to design and make work. And then the software engineers often go for you can configure it any which way you want. And then users get lost or get stuck with whatever configuration because they don't know, can't be bothered.
So earlier, Colin had said, maybe had posited, hey, all the tools are available, right? It's not a technology problem anymore. But our worlds are full of technology problems, and most of them are in the form of existing investments. And when we're thinking about a workflow technology, how do we think about how to leverage those investments and modernize them as we move forward? Michael, I know you have some experience with this.
So, how do we take sort of legacy?
Yeah,
legacy
how does that fit into your the evolution of a workspace?
Well, as I say, it's a bit of a challenge. I think you've got to do it. You've got to do it very much as an evolution, as I said before. I think it's about taking a specific piece of functionality evolving that into a newer technology and then taking a next piece and then evolving that as well, I think. And then, but still, you've still got to maintain all this legacy as well. But you've got to move away from it. Otherwise, we're going to, it's already complex enough if you look at most systems and platforms and how they interconnect. You mentioned spaghetti. Spaghetti is everywhere. Everything connects to everything, and that's part of the problem that we have. So yeah, I think, how do you get there? I think you just have to evolve slowly through sort of taking a piece of functionality, putting that into newer technology, but still also having that workflow with the older tech as well. That's the only way you can really achieve it, I think. So.
And Mariya, like when we're taking our organizations on that journey, right? Like how do we, people are invested in these things. How do we get them to come along? Like what gets people excited to want to, really invest in this?
I think more and more, especially on the innovation side of things, I see use cases where businesses want to expand by sort of consuming third-party products. Various startups coming out with amazing bits of functionality, and businesses think, well, if we glue it all together, it'll be fantastic in the end. Gluing it all together is not always the answer, but there is a need for the workflow, for some sort of desktop management, OpenFin helps with that.
I think that's also powerful when you think about if you've already got functionality that exists on the desktop that you're using that's from a vendor, but it's not part of your ecosystem. That's hugely powerful if you can leverage that. So, if there's, say, I don't know what it might be, say it's a spread trader or something you don't have in your platform, but you're using through a vendor, but you're having to rekey the information between the two platforms, then why don't you create automation and integration on top of that so you can leverage that technology? And then you can think about, well, actually, do I need to build this technology? Could the vendor build the technology for me and I just interact with it on the desktop? So it's an interesting concept. I don't know how well that will work, but if you were to build that yourself, it will probably take you, and it's already on your desktop, so why not leverage that already that the vendor provides? Why go away and spend the next 6 months building it yourself? So.
Yeah, I very much agree with that. Yeah. I think in financial services, we like to pretend we have a buy then build mentality, but we don't. It's the other way around. It's build and then reluctantly buy if we have to. But I guess getting back to the point that I made about we have all the technology we need at our fingertips, I still think that's entirely true. We probably don't have the money and the budget to actually, solve these migration challenges. But to get back to my point about being smarter and the FinJS Google example, if you've got 36 apps that you're working with and say 20 of them are legacy, if by working smarter you move to a space where maybe you only need 15 applications, you can remove the need to migrate a legacy application because you're surfacing its data in a completely different way, which is going to be a much more cost-effective way of effectively migrating that application. You've removed the need for the front end. The data still makes sense.
So Colin, you're kind of expressing your vision for the future, which was what my plan was to ask for us to kind of close out. So I think you beat me to it, but we're on time here, so we're doing well. Why don't we just come back this way, Mariya? Maybe talk a little bit about your vision of where we're headed.
My future goal is to convince more product owners to do proper user journeys from the start. If I can get businesses to move in that direction, I think a lot of problems will be solved by minimizing the number of apps, by improving the workflow, by bringing in the relevant third parties and not just whichever solution. So that's the end goal.
Fantastic. Michael?
One screen, that's all we need.
One
right?
screen,
yeah.
That's the vision.
Yeah. One of those mega ones that's about this big. But I think for me, it's about modernizing the way in which we work with our workspace and being fed what you need to know, when you need to know, and then to be able to action on that, and then take an action and then move on to the next. You shouldn't have to be looking around at all of these grids to be looking for outliers and other information that might be flashing. If you've seen a lot of vendor apps that have about 50 flashing buttons on them, most traders just ignore them because they say, well, should I look at that? No, it's been flashing. It's always flashed. I just ignore it now. So, that's kind of where we are now, you know, and I think we need to be fed information through alerts, and you can receive those on your desktop, on your phone, or wherever it might be, and then to be able to action. So that's where I'd like to get us to.
Fantastic. Well,
I've got 20 seconds. Can I throw in
yeah,
another
jump on it, Colin.
one? If we're jumping even further into
Yeah,
the
let's go.
future, AI, why is it within financial services that tends to be stuck in the back office? It's fraud detection, that sort of thing. Where's the AI that helps us on the desktop? You know, there's massive leaps forward in natural language understanding, natural language processing. We should be using that stuff.
Yeah, I'm very excited that the amount of attention that AI has been getting over the last 6 months. I think people had moved away from it a little bit and focused on some other things, but now are kind of coming back hard. We're already getting in on the coding side with Copilot and things like that. It's really incredible stuff.
Yeah, if Copilot can help the developer, what's the Copilot equivalent for the trader?
Yeah.
I don't think anyone's even imagined that yet. Maybe after a few beers we'll come up with
Come up with something.
Well, so that's the end of this panel. We're going to stay on time here. Big thanks to Michael, Colin, Mariya.